Well, welcome to this week's Walk Thru Voices from Walk Thru the Bible, as we're reading with you through the Daily Walk Bible reading schedule. If maybe you're listening to the Daily Walk podcast. Well, October starts a big month as we have finished up the Old Testament, and now in the month of October are starting to read the New Testaments. I hope that you are reading through the Gospels with us in the month of October. We'll link some resources down below to help you read through the Gospels in the month of October. You know, as you start reading the New Testament, the very first chapter of the New Testament actually sounds a little bit like the Old Testament. As you've been reading through the Old Testament, you've been reading the minor prophets, and maybe there's been a lot of excitement about getting to flip the page and over into the New Testament, and you start reading, and the first thing you read in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 1, this is the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham, and then for the next 16 verses, there is who was the father of who, and a long, long genealogy. And maybe you get there and you're thinking, wow, this sounds a lot like what we just have been reading in the Old Testament. You know, I know when we read the Old Testament, you'll come across these genealogies and all of those long names, and you're not exactly sure how to say them. And it's really easy to just sort of fly through those or skim through those pretty fast. I get it. I've been there. But when you get to this genealogy in the Gospel of Matthew, the very beginning of the New Testament, I don't want you to skim through this one. I want you to actually slow down and linger a little bit longer in this genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. In fact, I want you to really see two things about this opening genealogy in the story of Jesus that I think are really important. The first is how it begins in verse 1, that Jesus is the son of David and the son of Abraham. The son of David. In fact, 10 times in Matthew's gospel, Jesus is referred to as the son of David. It seems to be really important that we, as the reader of Jesus' story, pick up on the fact that Jesus is in the Davidic line, this kingly line that traces its lineage back to King David in the Old Testament. And then Jesus is the son of Abraham. This connection all the way back at the very beginning of the story where God calls Abram, we would later know him as Abraham, and tells him to leave his homeland and go to a land that he would show him, and he would make him a great nation, and he would have descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the grains of sand on the seashore. And remember, Abraham didn't have any kids, and he was too old to have kids, and yet God was faithful to this promise. And Jesus is connected as the son of Abraham all the way back to the very beginning of the story. Why does it matter that Jesus is the son of David? Why does it matter that Jesus is the son of Abraham? No, yeah, there's rich religious, theological reasons behind all of that. But I just want you to hear something super simple. That the Bible is one connected story. From the beginning to the end, from the front cover to the back, from Genesis all the way to Revelation, God is telling a single story of his redemptive plan and redemptive work from beginning to end. And I hope that encourages you to read this story not as individual pieces, but as a connected whole from beginning to end, and to see what God is doing through the stories and through the history that is written here. The other thing that I hope you pick up on as you linger a little bit in Matthew's genealogy of Jesus is, this is maybe something you've heard or seen before, but it just struck me again that there are 4 women in the genealogy of Jesus, which in the first century would have been a little bit unusual to include women, and then to think about the women that Matthew does include in this genealogy. Tamar and Rahab and Ruth and Bathsheba. These are not the women that, if you and I were writing a genealogy of Jesus would have included. We would have included Sarah or Rachel or Rebecca. But they would have been fine choices, I'm sure. But Matthew includes these 4 women. A Canaanite, a prostitute, Moabite women. Interestingly enough, these are all categories of people that were associated with Israel's failure to keep the covenant promise with God. And on the one hand, that highlights that it is God who is faithful to his promise, even when we're not. And on the other hand, it reminds us that God can write even the most messed up of people into his story to accomplish his purposes. And I know, speaking as someone who is messed up and full of mistakes and full of failure, that it is a beautiful reminder to me that no matter our past, no matter our failures, no matter our mistakes, God can still use us in the story that he is writing in our life. Well, I hope that you are encouraged to read the Gospels this month with us through the month of October. And I cannot wait to hear how reading the story of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John this month is changing your life. See you soon.